Hi, everybody. We are figuring out fun with slides. In the worst case, I will do it without, because you know what? We can do this. We'll be all right. How's everybody doing? Are we good? It's been a long day, long 2 days, a lot of dense information. First of all, how about Tatiana's talk? Was that incredible? I've been studying up, and I'm like, I know my stuff, and I was like, whew, it's deep. There's a lot more here to learn, and I always appreciate that chance. And I've been a fan of Clarity for years, and I hadn't had the chance to come until this year. And one of the most exciting things about this to me this year is, you know when you say a word so much or you read it so much that it looks kind of weird after a while? How many of you have heard the word systems enough in the last few days? Can you say systems? Say it a little bit. Systems. It's fun, right? Okay. So I just want to do that. I want to make sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. It's like, we're hearing this word a lot. As mentioned, I'm Anil Dash. I run a company called Glitch. I'm the CEO there. How many of you have heard of Glitch? That's amazing. So apparently you can just ask the person next to you if you don't know what it is. But we've been building a community where people make cool stuff on the web, whether that's fun art projects, activism, or something you use at work. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. That is sort of, I'm very excited about it. I'm very proud of it. But there's a bigger story to tell. And what I actually was reflecting on when Gina and the team first reached out about Clarity was where I had first learned about design systems, which was actually, I had come to San Francisco, and this is going to make me sound like I'm ancient, but it was 16 years ago. My friends had built a startup, and they were a then husband and wife couple, and the CEO, co-founder, was an incredible designer, and she was who introduced me to design systems. She just had an incredible sense of how systems fit together in both at a visual level and a functional level, and so it was really instructive to me. I've been a coder and stuff, but I hadn't thought about it. And I'm always mindful of I don't want to be looking back on the old days around the turn of the century, but there's a little bit of there are lessons to learn from the past, and I like to sort of bring those forward and see what are the things that I wish, in particular, I had learned over the last 20 years that somebody, if they had told me back then, I wish I could have learned an easier way, and maybe not as painfully. And so, looking back on that, there was this, frankly, something pretty unusual, which was a very young couple, a company led by a young woman, and this idea that a lot of us had, which was sort of commonplace on the internet back then, that everybody on the web should be able to create the web. It's very idealistic, but it wasn't that radical, actually, because if you think about it, and this is probably instructive, the very first web browser Tim Berners-Lee made, as many of you may know, it was an app called the World Wide Web, and it was both for reading the web and writing. You could consume and you could create. That was the genesis of the web, and that was what it always felt like it should be. And that remained true for the very first few years of the web, really until about the time, to my recollection, that Mark Andreessen made a web browser where you could read. And then he made a company, Netscape, and if you wanted to write, you would pay him. And now he's on the board of Facebook, so it's kind of a straight line. So I kid, but I don't kid. But the thing that's interesting about it is that we still had that idealism that I should be able to make that. The web shouldn't be something that happens to me. I should be able to make it. And so, we were part of a cohort of, a handful of people at different companies making what was sort of the early social web. The tool we made was called Movable Type. Some of you old-timers remember it. I appreciate y'all very much. We'll have a gathering of the elders later. And then, actually, another community we ran was LiveJournal, which I was very proud of, and shout out to the furries in the crowd. And we had, it was great. It was such an amazing community. It's these people were they found their people. It made me happy. And, they made all this amazing open source technology. And then other people were making amazing tools too. And we looked around at Blogger and Flickr. And so there was this sort of cohort of people making tools then. And it felt like something really new and really exciting. And it opened the doors for me to, one, be able to be in the industry. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what a startup was. I'd heard the phrase venture capital. I didn't know what it was. I was it's something about money. It makes me nervous, and which is still my feeling, actually. And it was sort of this, it was exciting, but also it was very much a reaction to what we had seen just a few years prior, the dot-com bubble. And it was we don't want to be those folks. That seems like they're just, they don't have a soul to them, and they didn't really love the internet. And we loved the internet. So, my friend started this company. I joined as the first employee. I basically bluffed my way through writing a business plan. We started to build some stuff. People started to use it. It started to work. It was amazing to see something that we'd created, and especially for me, interactions that we designed, be really gratifying to people. They were connecting with each other. They were feeling like there's people on the other side of this machine, right? And this was really this is what the web was for. And then on top of it, to say maybe we were giving voice to people that hadn't found their people before. Maybe we were giving a platform to voices that hadn't been heard. And that was that idealistic view of what we thought the internet was going to be. And I want to bring all that back because I think, obviously, a lot has happened since then. But there was a very positive, very aspirational, very idealistic and optimistic view of what this was going to mean and why we were going to create a product, a tool, a company, a community. And that was unbelievable to me. I hadn't conceived of, I think in the case of LiveJournal, it was the first social network to ever reach 10 million users on the same platform. That was unfathomable scale. Just we couldn't conceive of that. Now people, 10 million people will join an app in a day. But it was unbelievable, and it was so exciting. And it sparked the feeling that maybe this was all possible. Maybe we'd be able to do something that seemed impossible. And then things changed. There may be an understatement about the world of social media in particular. But, I saw, for example, that we did take investment in the company. And the investor said, you need some grown-ups to help you run this thing. So we'll bring in a CEO, and we'll put, the founder, she'll step aside, and she'll have a figurehead role, but still have a lot of influence. And we'll bring in a CEO who's an expert, which means had never used the product, didn't actually participate in social media, didn't know any of us, didn't know the community. So that's an expert. Good at spreadsheets, and I love spreadsheets, but okay. And, over the course of the next couple years, there were a lot of just needless blunders, things that pushed away the community, that sort of undermined trust, made the product worse, all that sort of stuff that all of us have seen happen, started to happen. But it's the first time I'd seen it. I didn't know that pattern or that anti-pattern that sometimes happens. And, by a few years later, our founder, that was her name, she did a TED Talk. Now, to context that, this is before YouTube. So TED Talks were not a thing online. They were not as much of the insufferable thought leadership, I got a book to sell kind of thing as they are now. So it was exciting. It was very prestigious. I think it was probably the first time I'd heard of TED. I was like, who's Ted? And she did a talk. It was really thoughtful. It was sort of about what could a more personal vision of social media look like. And then went on for an extended period of time. This is in 2006, I believe. An extended period of time about how we had noticed that women like her and marginalized people in general were increasingly being targeted in social media. That there was increasingly harassment, that it was getting more and more violent and much more intentional and organized. This is 13 years ago. 13 years ago, she said, and she was at that point a major figure in the industry, on the covers of magazines, obviously doing TED Talks, those kinds of things. And to give you an idea of the profound impotence of a TED Talk, the following talk after hers was Al Gore introducing the Inconvenient Truth Talk about climate change. So if you want a more effective demonstration of how TED Talks don't work to change the world, I cannot imagine better than that afternoon. I guess I'm not getting invited, but I'm here, so who cares? So there was a pretty dramatic response. I'll fast forward through most of it. By 18 months later, she had largely been pushed out of the company, and I had given up and left. And when I say left, I had been sort of, because I knew the founders, and I had a title that sounded impressive, and people out in the community knew me. I'd been that person who you go to if you need help because you're like, something's wrong at work, and you're like, well, maybe he can help me talk to the CEO, and we'll get something done. And I had been really proud of that. I felt like I'm going to be the advocate for these folks. And then they're going to listen, and they're going to fix it, because they say we do the right thing. We all do our jobs. They do whatever they do with bringing in the money, and I do what I do, and the designers do what they do, and everything is going to work. And by not too long later, I realized I was being told whatever would shut me up and whatever would get me out of the room. And by not long after that, I left. And when I say I left, I didn't just leave the company. I didn't just leave San Francisco. I went back to New York City, and I thought I would never work in tech again. Part of the reason I thought that was very powerful, wealthy people in the industry, names that you know, told me, you will never work in tech again. And I believed them. And particularly said it because, basically, I'm paraphrasing, you're too mouthy. You are pointing out problems that we do not want to hear about. And I didn't know what I'd do. I didn't have some other set of skills. I make stuff on the internet. That's all I've ever done. That's all I know how to do. I worked in construction. I was bad at it. And I didn't want to go back to swinging hammers poorly, right? And so it was a real moment of reckoning. And I was lucky. I was able to find a place to apply my skills. I ended up doing research and being in the nonprofit world for a while and sort of found other things that were meaningful to me. But the striking thing was, not only was our founder pushed out, I saw the women who had been co-founders of the other major social platforms had been pushed out. And most of the underrepresented people who were around me had been pushed out. And in the span of a few years, what had originally started as a pretty diverse, pretty broad community from a lot of different backgrounds, and not all from the same two universities, had atrophied, had narrowed. And I was naive. It took me years to see the pattern. I don't think I'm surprising any of you telling you this now. But being in it, it's like the frog being boiled. I didn't even realize it had happened around me. And so I didn't realize until years later, for example, that even as the first employee of the company, as the person who had written the business plan, and as somebody who had nominally had what was described on the paperwork as preferred options and equity in the company, the shares that I had in the company were worthless. Not only were they worthless, they had been somehow disappeared through some paperwork. And I found out about it because I emailed a lawyer many years later and said, whatever happened to the 7 years I spent at that company? And they said, oh, they got rid of your shares a long time ago. Just casually. And, you realize I don't understand all the systems that I think I do. I know the tech. I know the design systems. I don't know what systems I'm actually working in. And the good news is, that was a depressing story, it gets worse. I thought at that point, well, social media is terrible. That's as bad as it's going to get. 13 years ago. Turns out, nope. I'm good at seeing the future sometimes, not in this lane. And, long story short, you've heard this belabored a million times, but the shocking things to me were that it evolved into, rather than a way to connect, a machine that we were to feed. And the business models, rather than, I'm going to provide you with something you want and you're going to pay me for it, really were grounded in surveillance and coercion, right? Manipulation of my attention, manipulation of which information got amplified. And it was the same frog being boiled. It was the same gradual sense. At first, it was unimpeachable. Why wouldn't you want to just put some ads on it? It's free. They don't have to pay money. That means more people can access it. It's great. What could go wrong here, right? And sort of similarly, this conversation about the way the information was used, there was never a conversation about consent. Not once. How many of you in your workplace ever hear somebody use the word consent? A couple of hands. That's probably 100% of the people in the industry who get the privilege of getting to hear that word at work are in this room, right? And it didn't occur to me in its absence to miss it, right? You think about what's on the checklist. You don't think about what's not on the checklist that you didn't check off. And then, of course, what we were warned about, the harassment and the violence, became organized, became really dedicated to undermining fundamental social institutions. And the funny thing is, all those years I've been telling people, get on social media, start a blog, connect with people, we'd said, this will have huge impact on society. This will transform politics. This will transform policy making. Well, we were right. It sucks being right. It's almost as bad as being wrong sometimes. And So not only had I walked away from the industry, everything that I had sort of tried to wave a red flag about, and that the people around me, especially the underrepresented people around me, had tried to point out, had ended up being actually a lot worse than we'd imagined. And that was what prompted me to think again about systems, right? Because honestly, I felt culpability. I had helped catalyze a system that had caused a tremendous amount of harm. It was not my intent. There was also good caused, but it did not excuse my personal responsibility in creating platforms, technologies, and communities where real people had experienced real harm. And that didn't sit right with me. It weighed on me basically every day. And to Tatiana's point, to Ethan's point yesterday, I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't just abuse my privilege to say, I bet somebody else should fix it. But I'll be honest, I resented thinking about having to be complicit in fixing it. Because I was like, well, those guys all made billions, right? I still get the death threats, and they made billions. Can I also have the billions if I'm going to get the death threats? That would be nice. And it doesn't matter. They're not going to do it. They're not going to show up. They don't feel bad about it. And that was a profoundly troubling recognition for me, because these were people I had considered friends. These were people I thought of as peers. And they had built these giant networks and become household names. And I thought we shared values because the optimism, the thing that inspired us in the first place, was the same. The grand vision of what it would be was so similar. So didn't we share values about what our responsibility was in the world? The answer was no. So I went back to thinking about systems and trying to think about them as broadly as we can. And what you find when you look at an atomic model, when you look at structure, when you look at things in society, there's always another layer to the system. Whether you think about it as going one layer up or dig one layer deeper, you always solve the problem almost at one level of abstraction above or below the system where the problem is experienced, right? And I was that person. I bet some of you are too. How many of you have ever made like a really great design doc? You just felt proud of it. You're like, good, I can't wait to share this. It's okay. It's a safe place. You can raise your hands, right? And did you ever have the experience where there was like a really complicated problem and you wrote like perfect documentation of what everybody should do, and then they all did it and then the problem was fixed? No, yeah, me neither. I just was hoping somebody was like, yep. So it turns out problems are hard, and the lack of a documentation of a system, of an aspiration, is not the thing that catalyzes the system to act the right way. It's culture, it's people, it's all the things you all know. But I didn't get it for years, that all the things I had been written about, somebody oughta, there should be a way, we should fix this problem. Those were all fan fiction, right? Those were all my aspirational, my one true pairing is responsibility and social networks. Get together and live happily ever after. And they're like, they're not going to kiss. They are not going to get married. It is not going to happen. Let it go. That is not canon. And so my fan fiction was rejected soundly, right? And, the purpose of fan fiction is really interesting. People gather with each other to tell stories that they feel are true, that others might commiserate with and be entertained by. I succeeded on that level, but it never becomes canonical in the story, right? And so eventually, I tired of just writing fan fiction about the way the industry ought to run. I was tired of complaining. And I thought deeply about why was it not happening? Why were the good things not happening? Why didn't we have something positive to look at? Why weren't the fixes being put in place? Why is it that all the descriptions of every single damn thing that was wrong never got the thing to get fixed? And I'll tell you what was missing. Some of you might know the answer. Was power. Power. All I had had before, and all the jobs I'd ever had before, was soft power. They liked me. People liked me. And they wanted me to say nice things, especially as I got a bigger presence on social networking, social media. They wanted me to say nice things. So they would say whatever they could say to make me say nice things. Soft power. So if the complaint that my coworker had that I escalated to management was, this conference room doesn't have enough, Post-it notes, it'd get fixed. And if it was like, we have structural inequities in our team, they'd be like, we're working on it. And I was naive and dumb and gullible and comfortable for a long time. So I was like, soft power, this is great. I have followers on Twitter. People listen to what I say. I get a pat on the back as a good ally. I get my cookies. Turns out, that doesn't do shit. Spoilers. So then, I started thinking about real power. One of the biggest epiphanies I had was, who here knows how a company expresses its values? Show of hands. Go ahead. Shut it out. Tell me, how does a company express its values? Action. Posters. You got one. Mission statements. Money. Somebody said it. It's money. It's money. The answer is money. And I'll tell you why. Because capitalism. So I have misgivings about capitalism. It's a weird thing for a CEO to say, but it's true. Until the revolution comes and y'all throw me up against the wall, this is where we're at, right? Is we're going to be in a capitalist society and we're going to have companies and some of us are going to have to work there. And the one thing that will tell you about what that company gives a damn about in the world is where they spend money. It is not complicated. Everything else may be true, may not be true, but push comes to shove, it comes down to money. And so I came back at this idea about, well, what would it take to be able to amass power and control the flow of money in order to achieve this thing that I still irrationally believed in, which is that regular people should make the web. Everybody should make the web. And the difference was, I didn't believe now everybody should make the web because Tim Berners-Lee, something, web browsers, research. No. It was because by allowing only basically 5 companies run by 5 dudes to make most of the web, we had caused irreparable harm to society around us. We had undermined the work of workers, and we had destabilized what happens if you're a cab driver, what happens if you're somebody that is trying to run a hotel or an apartment. Like, we had changed these industries in ways that were irrevocable. And we had destabilized media and journalism, and we had destabilized politics. And so now the cost of not having regular people be able to create technology and create the web and create the experiences around us was akin to other systemic failures. We look at food. If all we had was factory farm fast food, how healthy would we be? And what would be the cultural loss if we had no home-cooked meals, if we had no connection to the tradition of when we have meals together, if we had no memories of the people we had eaten with and had meals with, right? If we had no idea of where the ingredients came from. I can go to Whole Foods and know the name of the farmer that grew the apple. And then I can look at my phone and I've got hundreds of apps and I don't know anybody who made any of them. Is it any wonder there's no accountability? Right? Is it any wonder these algorithms are not designed to make society better when we don't even know how to read the label on them? And that's us. We're the insiders. How many of the apps on your phone do you know who made it? You know one person there. You know a guy, you know that person, you know her. She's okay, right? That doesn't mean that app is doing what you need. And then I thought about the most fundamental failing, the first place to start, of how toxic these communities were online, of how vitriolic, how hateful, and how organized the attacks were. Not just, this isn't, people are being mean to me online. That's always, for me, that'll always be there. But organized, concerted efforts to take down people and institutions. That was awful. And I thought, what would it take to have a healthy community? And as I started to think about that, what I realized is I had to get back in. And that was not an easy call for me, as you might guess. But I thought about, could you build today, in the modern internet, not long ago, back when everything was sepia-toned and all of us were idealistic, but today, a healthy community. What would it take? And I look at, as an example, one of the things we did in trying to build a creative community on Glitch one of the first features we launched, I think it might have been the very first, was the thing that you can do if you're building an app on Glitch, is you can raise your hand and you can ask for help. You say, I'm stuck. And it's a little emoji of the person with their hand raised, and it'll sort of be like, hey, I need some help. And the reason why was to build a space where you can make yourself vulnerable. To be able to say, all of us make mistakes, all of us are imperfect, and I'm going to make myself vulnerable that maybe I could let you in. And when you do, on Glitch these days, basically within a minute, somebody comes in and helps you. And then you get actually the only metric, the only measurable number on the entire platform, which is you can thank somebody, and their screen will fill up with hearts, and it keeps track of how many times you've been thanked. That's as close as it gets to gamification. And the reason for that was, it's a feature, it's used, and people like it, and it's handy, and it's great. It's not used a ton. It's not in the top 10 most used features on the platform. But what it did was it set a tone, just like this room set a tone, that we were going to help each other. This was going to be a place where we would allow ourselves to be vulnerable with one another and trust that that other person on the other side wants to help us and will be gracious and welcoming in receiving our thanks when they do. We didn't have to set up that agreement in this room, right? Gina did that, but we all did that. I don't have to worry in this room that one of you is going to shout epithets at me or slurs at me. That would be really weird. And guess what? The fact that online, all the dudes who run all those other sites say, it's really normal. If you have this many people together, somebody's just going to shout epithets at you. No, it's really fucking weird. And I want you to stop being weird, right? I honestly, and I apologize, I feel like I'm like, am I missing something? It never happens. It's never happened at any place I've ever talked. And yet they're like, that's just what happens when people get together. It's like, no, it's not. Sorry, I digress. So a healthy community. We can have a healthy community if we build a space where we have said there is an expectation that you will be kind and generous to one another, and you'll have to take the risk of making yourself vulnerable in order to let others let their guard down too. There's going to be a de-escalation of the emotional temperature of this space. And it works. But, what is it with systems? There's always a layer deeper, right? To be able to build that healthy community, what do you have to do? Well, you have to have a team that wants to, right? You have to have a community that wants to do that. And an inclusive team is the best way I've found in order to build healthy communities. So you have to have everybody around the table, particularly to call out the harms that only they know about because of their lived experience. All the things I don't know with all my privilege, and all of us have those shortcomings to what we're able to see. And so having those people around the table was about having an inclusive team. But again, what I'd been told by the industry is, it's just too hard. It's just too hard. Like representation, it's really hard. Now they've evolved. The thing that, there's like a plague of like woke CEOs. And now they will say, we're working on it. We really, you know what they really care about? We really care about diversity. We really care. And you know how you know that's what they say? We really, they're like furrowed brow. We really care. And so that means they mean it. And the thing is, that's not true. And the way you know it's not true is, for example, I can tell you, Facebook cares about messaging. Do you know how I know Facebook cares about messaging? WhatsApp started to get a lot of users, especially in the rest of the world. And Facebook's like, you have users. We like users. We want your users. So they said, we're going to buy you. So the thing about that deal that's really interesting, there's a lot of things that are interesting, but one thing that's particularly interesting to me is from the time Zuck decided to buy WhatsApp, I think he deployed $18 billion, and by the time the deal closed, it was worth $22 billion. And I'm old-fashioned, so I think $22 billion is a lot of money. So I said, that's a lot of money. And they have ostensibly a board, which is like, I'm a CEO, you're supposed to, like, you go to the board, you make a presentation, and they're like, no, and then you're like, I'll make it better, and they're like, yes, right? But apparently they don't do all that at Facebook, because it took him 4 days to deploy $22 billion. 4 days. You spent more time picking out your headphones, right? And he was, you're like, but the other ones, they have the sound canceling, but he spent 4 days, and he's like a long weekend, and he's like, I want WhatsApp. I want to have WhatsApp. And they're like, Mark, you can have WhatsApp. And then he's like, $22 billion. That is what it looks like when Mark Zuckerberg gives a shit about something. Now he tells me, he furrowed brow, I could care about diversity. You care $0 billion about diversity. I round it off. I haven't seen the spreadsheet, but like I know if you do this, you do the billions. You're like, we collapse billions to a single-digit number, right? It's 0. That's what it would round to. And so the wild thing is, we're Glitch. We're a little teeny tiny startup, right? 30% of our team identifies as LGBTQ, and majority of our team are women and non-binary folks, including in management. Right? We're proportional on race across our staff in the US, including Black and Latinx employees. How come I can do it? Am I magic? What am I made out of? I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't drop out of Harvard. So, is that better or worse? I don't know. I didn't go to college. But the thing is, I can read a spreadsheet, and I know that all these things they said were too hard about building an inclusive team were very doable. And part of it was, you know what they do, the dot, what do they say? Pipeline? Oh, it's pipeline. What do you mean, pipeline? What they mean is, we would like to hire 4 white women as engineers in 12 years when they get out of school. That's what pipeline means, right? And it's not a pipeline problem, because look at most of these companies. Look at their marketing team. Look at their legal team. Are you telling me there's no Latinx lawyers in California? There are no Black marketing folks in California, right? Because if you're going to use this excuse for engineering, that's bullshit, but let's put it aside. Let's put the coders and the designers and all those product people aside, and let's look at the business side, and let's look at marketing, and let's look at legal, and let's look at accounting, and over there, you haven't hired anybody either. So I don't buy it. So the funny thing is, what will all these companies tell you? We're data-driven. We care about metrics, right? I don't buy it. It's possible. It's totally possible to build an inclusive team. And you got to do it, because if you want to build a healthy community, you got to build an inclusive team. But what? There's always one layer deeper. If you want to build an inclusive team, what do you got to do? It's a system, right? Well, you have to have accountable leadership. Because what happens if you say, we're going to set a goal of proportional representation by genders across our company in 2 years, and then you don't meet it? Well, again, I'm old-fashioned. When I used to not do my job, I would get fired from it. And like in construction, they'll fire you like nothing, you know? And apparently, when you are in those jobs in many of these companies and you don't do your job that you said you're going to do, nothing happens. Sometimes you get a book deal. It's wild. So, or you get to do a TED Talk. I guess that's how it happens. So the thing that was really interesting to me was there's no accountability, right? And when we talk about we're causing harms or leaking people's data, here's a question for you. How long ago did the FTC first start monitoring Facebook for abusing our data? It's 10 years ago. And it's been super effective. So there's no accountability, right? There's absolutely no accountability. And so you realize as individuals, you all have to build the systems of accountability, right? I'm lucky. I'm a CEO. I get to do what I want. But I want to build systems of accountability too. And there are things you can do. And most of them, this is very exciting to me, most of them involve spreadsheets. So what you can do is you can make a spreadsheet that says, here's all the roles in our company, and here's what everybody gets paid for them. It's a good thing to do. We did it at our company. We said, we're going to have salary transparency inside the company. These are the roles. Here's how we determine it. Now you know you're paid the same as that other person, regardless of what your identities are, and you don't have to sweat it. Did you know you can do that too, through the power of spreadsheets? Because Ethan is right, you should unionize, but it's scary, and it's a lot of work, and it takes time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But in the meantime, make some spreadsheets. They get you a lot of benefit really quickly. And the great thing about this is, guess what? Our system's imperfect. We screw up. There are people, their comp wasn't right, and I got to fix it. They believed me that I would fix it. They believed me that their paycheck not being right was not because of how they looked or who they were or what their background was or what their identity was, but because of a clerical error. And the reason they could believe it was because they could look at the documentation and know what the system was supposed to do. They could trust it. I was held accountable to my employees because of a spreadsheet. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean there's no mistakes. It just means it's possible there might be a chance of accountability. There are many things we can do like this. And that one is totally legal, so it's even better. But if you want to have a healthy community, you got to have an inclusive team. If you want to have an inclusive team, you got to have accountable leadership. How do you get accountable leadership? What's one level below that? Well, I had a theory for a long time that shame was effective. You could write about this leader has this fault and is doing this thing wrong and causing this harm, and then that person, if they heard it, would see it and reflect and change. This is wrong. That doesn't happen. I wish it did. Individuals will often have this reaction. Very few people with a substantial amount of power have that reaction. They will get defensive. Sometimes they will point out valid critiques of your critique, right? Shortcomings of your bug report. Those might be valid. Usually they'll use those as a dodge, and then very little actual accountability will happen. So as a theory of change for a system, to say, I'm going to point out the flaw in this person, it is necessary. We cannot remedy harms we can't identify. We got to name it before we can fix it. So that's true. But the theory that naming it does fix it is not true, right? There has to be another step. If you are lucky, if you're in a healthy organization with responsible leaders, you pointing out that something is broken will inspire them and incentivize them to fix it. And sometimes fixes are hard and are imperfect and take time. I'm very, very empathetic to that. But, said at the beginning, companies express their values through money. So if you want to build a system where you have that sort of accountability, you've got to look at where the money comes from and where it goes to. And one of the outcomes of that spreadsheet we have at our company is there's a multiplier limit about my salary versus the lowest salary in the company. So it's real simple to sort of know what the range of salaries in the company is going to be, and that I'm not going to be outrageously compensated without regard to how everybody else in the company is doing. But it also gets to the economics of the company itself. When companies build these systems of surveillance that encourage abuse, that encourage algorithms that suggest horrible, hateful content, inevitably they say it's just an unforeseeable outcome of our business model. And we have to have our business model, otherwise we won't exist. But the thing is, there are lots of businesses that don't rely on surveillance and data gathering and doing creepy things with your data and brokering your information to others, right? I mean, every day we use Slack and we use Dropbox and we use like all kinds of, like GitHub, like all kinds of stuff, right? So you can build a business model that like they still make boatloads of money selling us all tools that we use every day, and that's great. And somehow that gets erased from the conversation that that's a way to make money. And I mean, like Apple, usually most of the times, like the biggest company in the world are right up there, and like we pay them too much money for it, and there's other problems about them. But like for the most part, they're not just like stealing our data and doing creepy things with it. And yet the companies that do that kind of manipulation use it as an excuse. And so what it teaches us is you will not get around the business model, right? That's the fundamental. And you have to go right at it. And what I would propose to all of you as we talk about how to take power is talking about the risks of that model. It has never been riskier in the history of the world to run a business predicated on surveilling people's data and then monetizing it behind their backs. It should be scary as hell for companies. There's regulatory risks, there are internal risks within the company, all these kinds of things. What you should all be doing in the design work that you do is amplifying the terror of your company if they move towards that direction. If they start to say, maybe we want to do more ads on this, and maybe we want to build more of those platforms, you should ramp up the fear that they have about it and say, you know what? It's safer over here where we offer goods and services in exchange for money. It's an old-fashioned idea. The great thing about this, again, is it's legal and it's true. These are amazing things. I love it. I love when you have something that's like, I'm not lying and I'm not breaking any laws. So this is my corporate responsibility piece as a CEO. But you notice every layer is about the layer below it. Every system is about the systems around it. And everything is about understanding how they interplay and how one depends on the other. I think this goes to Tatiana's point about our roots being joined. I want to really emphasize, I don't hold us up as an ideal, like I'm lucky I get to run a company, we get to do things our way, and that people seem to respond to it. But we have a ton of work to do. All of us have a ton of work to do. I feel the weight of that responsibility every day. Like I said, I have things to atone for personally. But all of us have work to do in remedying these issues. And what I want to do is really open the door on an important idea, which is it is possible. It is possible to fix these things. I'm not, as you can tell, a wide-eyed idealist anymore. I am not as naive as I was when I first came to San Francisco to say, I'm going to work on a startup, and it's going to be fun and great. But I do still believe it is powerful to enable people to make things. That the world is healthier, for example, when the majority of what we make is local and organic and homegrown. The question we should be asking each other when we look at our phones, when we look at all the time we spend online, how many of those things that you go to, that you tap on, that you click on, were made by somebody you love? How many were made by somebody that loves you? How many were made by somebody in your community? How many do you even know somebody who made them and what they think about you and your values? These are the kinds of questions we should ask in our own behaviors, in our own day-to-day. Because what it does is it opens up the possibility of going to a moment, not going back, but bringing forward a past moment when those were ordinary things. It is not wild-eyed optimism to say that most people could make things online, that they could make the things they use. A lot of y'all had MySpace pages. I saw them. So, you're able to make stuff, right? But it's not a radical idea to be able to say that we create these things. And the reason it matters is if more of what we interact with, where we spend our time, what we engage with, are made by communities of people that know each other, are made by people that will be accountable and known to us, we fix the systems underneath these problems. We obviate the need for trying to go back and close the door after the horse has already bolted the barn. These things are much, much harder to fix retroactively. But they're not hopeless. They're about showing alternate models. They're about showing other potentials. And I want to close, this happened today, and it's serendipitous, but it's very meaningful for me personally. We started a couple years building Glitch, this idea, we're going to be able to make things that people are going to want to share with the world. Today, this morning, we crossed 3 million apps on Glitch, 3 million projects. That is about 50% bigger than Apple's App Store or the Google Play Store. And all of them are open source. All of them are made by regular people, whether they use them at work or at home. And all of them are about this new vision of being able to reuse each other's work, learn from each other's mistakes, ask each other questions, and be in a space where there are no Nazis and no roving bands of hateful people and no business model around extraction. It's possible. Thank you. I point that out because when we started doing it, I didn't think it was possible. I hoped it was. But if you have the right people in the room, if you have a generous community around you, if you think about your place in the system and how to shift it, if you think about taking power, and you think about sharing power, all these things are possible. And it raises sort of the most important question, and the one I ask myself every day, and the one I think I want to leave all of you with, which is, even though we know all the things that are broken and all the things that can go wrong, there's a path out. And it really comes from asking ourselves, what are we going to make? What are we going to create? And what I want to challenge each of you to think about is, for all of the systems we create, for all the problems we want to solve, our own personal agency, our own personal ability to create things, you have so much power. You have so much power to change things you have no idea. And when I first came to San Francisco, I didn't know it. And I thought that tech was a thing that was going to happen to me. But it's a lie. It's a lie they try to convince you with. It's something they try to confuse you with. And it is not true. You have all the power in the world to create the solutions to the problems that we all care about. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your honesty about that sort of optimism and that idealism and stuff is something I've gone through personally and stuff, and Ethan alluded to it yesterday and stuff as well. It's just like there is this ideal, like there is this promise that this technology that didn't exist 30 years ago unlocked, right?
Well, I think we all, the first time you got online, you're like, this is going to be cool, right? I'm gonna make a friend. I'm gonna make something cool. Like, we weren't wrong.
Yeah.
We might not have seen all the bad things that were gonna happen or could come, but we weren't wrong. And like, maybe I'm gonna connect with somebody in this chat room or online. And I think the purity of that desire to say a technology is gonna help me be my better self or help me make a connection.
Yeah.
I think is still profound.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's still attainable? Is it possible to course correct, without? And again, the systems underlying capitalism or what it's it's gotten its hands around it.
Yeah.
Is it possible to pry it out and sort of march down that path, or is it just we have to learn how to deal with it in the confines of the systems? That
it's both. The broken things are not going to go away.
Right.
Right. And I look at whatever. If we're going to reckon with climate change, like cars are not going to go away.
Oh.
Planes are not going to go away. Can we make choices?
No.
About how we consume. And I think the same is true for tech. Like right now, to say, I feel creeped out by Facebook, but I'm not going to quit Instagram is like, to an approximation, probably everybody in this room. And I absolve you. And to that point, it is unfair for me to be like, my kid's grandma is not going to see photos of him because of some point I have about the terms of service. It's like, that's absurd.
Yeah.
But if I say, let's spend more of our time online and on platforms that we trust and feel good about and are proud to be part of, that's reasonable.
Yeah.
It's sort of saying, it's not saying like, if I'm stuck in an airport, I'm going to eat some fast food. It is what it is.
Sure.
I'm not going to do that every meal because I'm not going to feel good.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of shifting the balance of there are other alternatives or there are other options hasn't been true for a while, because people say, oh, well, that all died out when MySpace died or when GeoCities died or whatever point people want to peg to. They're sort of but now it's just this era. It's just this few centralized things. It's it doesn't have to be that way at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that that's true for? It's we're obviously swimming in these waters with the platform, so we know what's the adjacent possible or whatever. But for grandma and for all these other people, it's I hear this all the time. It's people think Facebook is the internet, right?
Yeah.
So it's and that's obviously probably a much higher sort of percentage of people.
Yeah, before people thought Facebook was the internet, they thought Google was the internet, and before that they thought AOL was the internet, right? There's always is there a large cohort of people for whom a single dominant platform defines the internet? Yes, right? I don't think you're going to pry that loose in a lot of the world, especially when people have limited resources and limited access.
Right.
What I think about is, can important things happen on other platforms in other places? Can my local community group, my book club, my activist organization, can we have our space? I think about one of those interesting things. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, how many of you trust the next election to run well on Facebook? It's weird. There's no hands. I guess everybody's tired. I'm tired of asking that question. And it's funny because this is skewed towards a predominantly progressive group here, but no matter where you are, everybody is we don't trust that. We can't do the fundraising there. And then you say to people, okay, you care about the environment in your community and you're organizing votes around that, or you care about workers' rights in your community, organizing around that. You say, well, how are you getting together? How are you planning your meetings?
Right.
How are you organizing your voices? They'll sort of back up, cringe a little bit, and we got a Facebook group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, I don't even know people's emails, or I met this person on Instagram, and that's the only way I know to connect with them. Yeah. And so we can't even conceive of choices outside of those spaces. That's the space we want to open up, right? To be able to sort of say, they're just other tools.
Right.
You know, I think there's so many. It's interesting. Our creative process has changed so much. I think Envision and Figma and folks from Webflow are all here. They're incredible tools, right? And it frees you up creatively. You're able to we're going to work together. You know, like I think like Figma or Envision, the workflow of we're doing this thing together in real time. And we have some of that on Glitch, where it's we're coding together in real time, and it feels creative, and it feels expressive, and it feels emotionally satisfying in the same way that playing a game with somebody is, or whatever else. And then for organizing our communities, for talking to our families, for all these other things, we let go of that. It's at work, I have great expressive tools where I have a ton of control and can choose what I do.
Sure.
And then for family, I'm they can go whatever shoebox, just they'll just be stuck over here, and who knows what will happen to them. It's it seems like if anything, it should be the inverse, or ideally, all of it's in the space that we feel good about.
Right. How much does the scale and again the business model of the surveillance and everything you talked about sort of like that ivy just sort of cover over those sort of chances for those sort of independent things? Because I could totally see a product that's small scale group organization, super.
But how do you teach everybody to use it?
How do you teach everyone to use it, for one, and especially if you're goods and services in exchange for money, when it's you got the free thing that's gigantic and everyone's already on, versus that. It's sometimes those odds just seem insurmountable. But
so, there's a couple things. We've already made privacy a luxury good.
Right.
So if you can afford the right phone and you can afford the right tools, you can have some higher measure of privacy. I think there are a lot of things that seem insurmountable, and part of them is about the dynamics of how we choose these things, right? But interestingly, we talk about price, and price matters, obviously. Economics drives a lot of this. But for example, nobody says, let me evaluate 10 photo sharing apps for my family and look at the one that has the best filters and choose that, right?
Right.
And you're not what's the finest video quality? TikTok. Right, that's not where you're going, right? You are choosing where your friends are and where the cool shit is, and where the celebrities you like are, whatever, right? And that's how society makes choices.
Sure.
So these levers happen in culture, and happen in society, and happen in design, and happen in emotion, not on purely this feature list evaluation, and not on purely economic evaluation.
Right.
Right. People choose. I look at high school kids in our neighborhood, which is very, very broad economic disparity, so it's a very wide range of people. And the kids are will actively tease kids with green bubbles, right? An Android phone, right? So the pressure of being on the iPhone, it's problematic, but it's very telling about these choices of design choice in an app drive social behavior at a very, very deep level in culture. And the inverse is true too.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit,
Sure.
Your thoughts on openness and transparency, just sort of cutting through the bullshit of of this you just have to take me at my word kind of thing. One of the things I love about the web is that ability to not just produce the final product, but to all of the stuff that landed on the cutting room floor and all of that other stuff that you're able to share that as well.
The creative process.
Yeah.
After we did the hand raise thing for help, to ask for help on Glitch, the next thing we did was a feature called Rewind. And every Glitch project, so it's a full stack web app, and behind the scenes it's Git, right? So we're storing all the changes as you type. And it's cool. And I don't know about you all, but I don't get Git. I have to man Git every time. Be how do I do anything? This just hurts my brain. It doesn't work the way I work. Blessings to those who can do it. And so we built this timeline slider. And it's rewinding a YouTube video. If you want to go back through your Git history on Glitch, you just slide the winder back. And what's interesting is people who know Git forwards and backwards are oh, that's easier. I like that, right? So there's a thing that happens when you sort of make it approachable. But for people who are I don't know what Git or any of that stuff is, I want to go back because I want to see what you typed.
Yeah.
And in particular, I never thought of this. Actually, I wish I were this was our genius idea, then it happened. But this is what happens when you show things to smart people. What people told me is, I look at the commits on the code on a project in Git, And I only see it when it's working, because nobody ever commits to Git unless it's working, right? You don't push to GitHub unless you like fix the bug. You're not like, that's not working later. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of, unless you're like really awful. But like for the most part, I probably would do that. I'm a bad person. But I think for the most part, you're like, that's fixed, right?
Right.
And they're like, I can see in between what they did from when they got to here and here, and it was broken and then they fixed it.
Yeah.
And that was an epiphany for me, because I was like, oh shit, yeah. Like I never get to see the fix. I never get to see that. And we had a little bit of that. I'm on the board of Stack Overflow, and you get a little bit of that with like people asking coding questions, and you get to see that. But for the most part, it is about that creative impulse. I was always the person that loved the DVD extras like as much or more than the film.
Yeah.
And I can watch like infinite hours of footage of like some dude in a green suit with the little white dots on him doing motion capture. And part of it is that's equally as compelling as the story of most comic book movies, but also it's like, this is the work. They're going to do digital stuff, like I love that shit.
Right.
And so that was a very, that idea of I could see the motion capture session for whoever had, fixed this rendering bug, on mobile Safari. I'm like, yes, that is my jam.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So these folks are all going to go back to their respective organizations.
Yeah.
And tomorrow, I guess. It's still early in the week, right? I don't know.
Do you all just have vacation now?
Yeah.
Wow. I got to go to work. I don't want to.
This is how it works. And you talk about that power, and again, like Tatiana's talk as well. It's like these underlying systems that sort of again seem sort of hard to reach,
intractable.
Yeah. So it's like I guess just like any sort of closing words, not to have you like rehash like the last part of your talk, but like again diving back into catching up on the inbox and getting swept away and all of that, myself included.
Yeah, the day-to-day is coming. So what do you do? I think it's terrifying to exercise your power, and part of it is it's unknown. Like, what are they going to do? I don't like. Are they going to fire you? Like, if you raise that issue, you're probably inside your company, you have like an internal feedback system, or you have the town hall or all hands, and you ask a question. What is the range of harm they can cause you? This is the thing to actually talk about. If you have a partner or a friend, sit down and talk to them about. And what is the range of things they can do? And how do you mitigate that range? Right? You want it to be as non-harmful as possible. How much power do you have to be flexible in where you're at now? We're relatively fortunate. We get to be at these events, and we're in an industry that many of our skills are in demand. And to say, how much of a leap could I take? And I'm very inspired by a friend of mine, Ethan Zuckerman, is a professor at MIT, and he's affiliated with the Media Lab. And a mutual friend of ours is the director of the MIT Media Lab, Joichi Ito. And I've known him for many years, and he's opened the door for me many times. And the story in the Boston Globe this week pretty clearly implicates him in being, at the very least, insufficiently critical of their fundraising from Jeffrey Epstein. By my estimation, there's no complicity in the abuse, but there's certainly ignoring of the effects and complicity in normalizing this predator.
Right.
And it always hurts to lose a hero.
Yeah.
And Ethan, who has a young child, a little bit older than mine, and a life and a career, and an exposure to risk like all of us do, immediately resigned. And in the line of work he is in, there is no more exalted place to be than MIT's Media Lab. And in doing so, puts pressure on someone that we had both considered a friend for a long time, too, in a way that becomes a front-page story in the news. And so I also got to gain a hero. And he doesn't know what he's doing next. And the kind of research he does, there is support for it, and people want it to be done for the good of society. But it's not like those of us that can just hop to another startup that just got funded. He did it. He did the right thing. I think we can too.
Yeah. I'd say that's a fantastic place to leave it. Everybody, Anil Dash.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.